afternoon.
Hi everyone, really excited to be here today, introducing the book that the three of us, who I'll introduce in a moment, have loved writing, and Practical Action Press have published, and we're grateful to them for working with us. I'm Peter Westerby, and my two other colleagues here on the screen are David Palmer and Athena Lathouris, commonly known as Tina by her friends. And we're speaking from Australia, the continent or country, but we live in separate countries in terms of First Nation. Dave down the bottom is from Noongar country in the west, in Perth, and I am from Jinnabara country, and Tina's from Cubby Cubby country, both about 100 kilometres north of Brisbane. So we're really excited to be talking about our book that is coming out. It's called 40 Critical Thinkers for Community Development. And it's very, we're proud of this book. You can avoid reading about 200 books about all these authors if you read this book. We've made accessible the ideas and the biography of 40 thinkers who are not community development workers, but poets, activists, and just great thinkers who have written, so you know we can delve into their archive of practice, and we've distilled what's relevant for community development. So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, you know, you could be reading all these books by Joanna Macy or Arundhati Roy or James Baldwin or Gustavo Esteva, and I could go, but you don't have to, because we've made it accessible. However, one of our hopes is that you do get so excited by each of these authors that you go and read some of their work. So just, I'm going to quickly talk about, very quickly, the purpose of the book. Tina's going to talk about how you might use the book. Dave's going to talk about how we think about learning community development as a practice for citizens or professionals. And then we're going to go around again, each sharing what we call the gem of a wisdom for community development from one or two authors, okay? So that's what we're going to do. Do you want to just say hello, Dave and Tina?
Hi. Hi from
Zoom
Australia.
They found their voice.
That means my heart is happy to see you. Even you, Peter.
Thank you. All right, so it's we have written this book to help, I was going to say, deepen, expand, and disrupt people's community development practice. And what we mean by that is that people deepen, get a sense of the roots of our practice wisdom that comes out of all this work that the ancestors have taught us. And in this case, the ancestors are 40 authors. So, you know, you can go deep and feel like your practice is on solid ground. You can also expand your practice, because maybe your practice is guided by 3 or 4 authors you fell in love with, or you've been mentored into. And this book says, here's a heap more ideas, like expand, you know, rethink, reimagine. And it can disrupt, because some of the ideas are pretty disruptive. And I was reading the proof copy the last 2 days, and I found my ideas disrupted. Things that I took for granted were challenged. So the book attempts to do those 3 things. And at the same time, it's providing a lot of ideas, which we hope help people build what we call a practice framework. And quite simply what we mean by that is our practice is guided by a conceptual structure of ideas that, you know, like we all agree we've got to listen in community development, but who do we listen to? And one of the authors, for example, Frantz Fanon, says, you know, there's a revolutionary listening to those on the bottom of society. So there's an idea, guides our practice. And if we have a lot of good ideas, we have a good framework. So the book's hoping to do that. So that's the key goal. There's many other goals, but they're the key ones. I'm going to hand over to Tina, who is going to talk to us about how we might use the book in an everyday way.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And hi, everyone. Yeah, so as Peter says, the book is really written for community development practitioners, citizens or activists and students of community development. And we were reflecting about this process that we've been engaged in for past about 18 months and said to ourselves, we wish this book had been around back when we were starting out doing community development. So we kind of had that in mind as we were writing it. But the type of uses for it, we're hoping that people will think that they could use it individually and do some personal reflection, you know, perhaps read a chapter every few days or once a week, once a month, something like that. There's only 40 chapters. Or get together with others in study groups and do some reading and then do some, you know, have some discussion and dialogue about how the concepts have resonated with you and, you know, how that, how you're making sense of that. We also could see that people that work together in project teams or in particular organisations, if they're grappling with a particular issue, perhaps they could use some of the critical thinkers in the book to do some of that disrupting that Peter was just referring to. How can we push our thinking a little bit more? How could we use these thinkers to grapple with an issue we might be having? Similarly, you might want to think you could use it in external supervision. So again, have someone help you to reflect on your practice with you and what are some of the ideas in the book that could help. For community development educators, we think this would be a terrific book for people doing community development courses. It could be a resource for your library, or you could set it even as an assessment item, something out of the book for students. And that's what I'm actually going to do next semester, is I'm going to get my students to work in small groups and look at some of the activists and critical thinkers and do some research on that and do some comparisons and so on. So they're just a few ideas what the book could be useful for. Over to you, Dave.
Like my colleagues, I began as a community worker when I was quite young. I left school prematurely by some standards and took up an apprenticeship in the building industry. And it wasn't until I'd completed that apprenticeship that I started youth and community work. There were two things that I found difficult as someone working mostly with Indigenous young people, First Nations Australian young people. The first was that I had clearly not the personal experience that would help me or to contend with an understanding of what they were going through. The second was that I was confronted by people talking about this thing called youth and community work, and I didn't understand much of what they were talking about. There were two reasons for that. One was that I didn't have access to those ancestors as Peter described them. And the second was that the language people were using was pretty abstract or even rhetorical. They were using cliches, words, buzzwords, platitudes, things that were pretty thin, actually. I didn't know that at the time, but I didn't understand it, wasn't helpful. And so that prompted me to read. And like my colleagues here, and like that beautiful background that sits behind Tina, there's a series of ideas that people with ideas that I've met over the last little while. And one of the things that we've tried to do with the book is to recognise that actually people don't usually come into this work with clear ideas about what they're doing, clear ideas about those ancestors, the language that might help them. What my son calls the kind of seeds that we can plant and tender and fertilise and work with over many years to help us be clearer about what it is that we're doing, the array of ideas. I went chasing after a whole bunch, and what we've tried to do in the book and how we suggest it, one of the things that we suggest about how it might be used is to come to it as if you are the young Dave or the young Peter or the young Tina, with a whole bunch of questions, whole bunch of challenges, but not a real clear idea about what it is that we want to do. And what we've tried to do is to distill some of where we've been with those elders. So we do want to recognise that in a lot of it, to be honest, that for a lot of us, we're not really clear. This is difficult work. If the work we were doing was easy and a cliche could satisfy us, then it would have been, we'd live in a wonderful world right now. All the work had been tidied up. The really difficult things would be fixed. They haven't been because it's complex. So we need more ideas rather than a couple of little ones or half ideas. Pedro, over to you to talk about some of the people or two of the people that you've acquainted yourself with.
Yeah, thanks, Dave and Tina. I should just say there are 40 authors that we give us an account of, and two quick things before I speak about my two. It's not like they're Wikipedia summaries. Like, we've written these in a way that, one, connects them to community development specifically, and two, discusses our connection to these authors quite personally. So, you know, we reckon the book is different to doing 40 Wikipedia searches. It gives you a lot of community development wisdom. So we're very excited about that. And as Tina might say, each of those words on the back of her background there represent those wisdoms, okay? So I wanted to first just say a couple of words about one of my favourite authors, Bell Hooks. I wrote about her as one of my contributions. I love her work. Been grappling with her work for about 15 years. She's one of the few authors we've written about who's still alive. And the gem of a wisdom that I took from her work was her idea that's called we come to theory because of our pain. Or in fact, she says, I came to theory because of my pain. So her work as an African-American woman who came to critical theory to make sense of what she calls the patriarchal domination system, which is about intersectionality of race, gender, capitalism. She came to those theories, critical theories, to make sense of her pain as a young Black woman who didn't understand why she was excluded. And so she theorized because she was trying to make sense of her personal life. Now, I've turned I come to my theory because of my pain into we come to theory because of pain. To really illustrate that most people get involved in community development not because of some abstract idea or ideal, but because they are feeling some suffering. And they join with others who have similar experiences of suffering, and they try to make sense their pain, whether it's, you know, the pain of unemployment, the pain of not having access to things with disabilities or loneliness. We come to that. We come to meet with others, which is what the community development method is. You meet with others and you explore ways forward. So really it's to foreground that emotion that is behind the need for people to come into community processes. Okay, so she's an amazing author. That's the idea I wanted to share from her. The second author I just wanted to quickly mention, because most of you would not have heard of this guy, Epeli Hualfa, Tongan thinker from our part of the world, the Pacific, which is, I wanted to foreground him because rarely do people around the world read of people from the Pacific. And that's one of the other things we've tried to do in this book. We've tried to represent thinkers, ancestors from all around the world. And even though, disappointingly, half are still from North America and Europe, because that's where people write from, we still have half of the authors from other parts of the world. So this wonderful writer, who I discovered in a bookshop in Fiji many years ago, the gem of a wisdom we took from him was stay close to the ground. And what that simply means is that, you know, most community development work requires relational skills, being in relationship. It requires emotional skills to be able to listen deeply to people's feelings. It requires technical skills of beginning, middle, end. But he is reminding us of the profound need for anthropological skills, that to work with people, we need to stay close to the ground upon which people live, with their language, their protocols, their ways of thinking, and we need to get inside that to be able to work respectfully with people. So that's a gem of a wisdom from the Pacific. So they're my two. I could go on and that, but I think that's enough. Yeah, Tina. No, Dave.
Thanks, Pedro. The first of the authors I'd like to introduce you to is, it kind of has a message that sits across the book as well as being a specific idea. And her name's Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She's a Nigerian writer. She gives a great TED talk. I'd thoroughly recommend it. Google and listen to her beautifully articulate her idea, her central idea, which is really to caution us against relying on a single story about a community. We, in the West in particular, but definitely those of us that are come into communities rely on stories, on narratives, on sometimes they're even framed as the truth or research about that community. And often it, to use ideas from elsewhere, often those first stories that we're familiar with are stories that are quite negative. There's stories about communities who are in chaos. They're communities that outsiders think are dysfunctional. They're often communities that might struggle from poverty, they struggle from trauma, they struggle from addictions and an array of challenges. Now, Adichie she reminds us that these are not they're not lies, they're not even incorrect. They're the first story. And all communities, and this resonates with me, every community that I have spent time with, have at least a second, third, fourth, fifth story. I'm routinely in remote Indigenous communities who are indeed struggling more than most across the globe, with many of the things that I just talked about. But in each of those communities are strong nanas, strong aunties, strong pops, grandparents. There are people doing remarkable things in the face of that trauma and those challenges. And in a way, I think Adichie is cautioning us against relying on a single idea, a canon, a taken for granted truth. And often in our work, people will come into the study of community development and they'll ask us, what is community development? Expecting a single answer. And Adichie's offering us the wisdom of suggesting we go look for many answers. The second person I would like to introduce you to is passed away while we were writing the book. Her name's Deborah Bird Rose. And she introduces or reminds us all that thinking about community as only involving the lives of humans is quite a recent idea. And she spends a lot of time, or she spent a lot of time in the north of Australia, where Indigenous people consider what they call country or non-human elements of our ecology as just as important in community as the human elements. She reminds us that, or she offers us the wisdom from Indigenous elders that she spent time with, that our families, our communities, the ones that we are intimate with also include the birds, the animals, the crows that you might hear behind me, the rivers, the pebbles, the rocks, the creeks, the ecologies. Indeed, Indigenous systems across the world have very sophisticated ways of seeing these things as intricately and intimately involved in community. To think about community in the absence of non-humans has had, particularly over the last 300 years, devastating consequences. And as she was taught, if we rather consider country as community, then and see there are obligations that run from it, that country will look after us. So they're two of the people that I've been inspired by over the years, and we've included in the book. Tina.
Thanks, Dave. And the first person I wanted to talk about that, excuse me, that I've written about dovetails nicely after what you've just said, Dave, about Deborah Bird Rose, and that's Mary Graham. And Mary is an Australian Aboriginal author, activist, philosopher and educator. She actually introduced me to community development and working with Indigenous communities way back in the dark ages when I was studying at university for the first time. She writes about Aboriginal worldviews and the idea, this concept that the land is the source of the law. The thing that I particularly picked up on in reading some of her writing was about place method. And I wanted to just talk about that for a sec because it sort of signifies this diagram that's sitting behind me here on the screen that Peter and Dave have mentioned. So Mary talks about starting to make the connection, as Dave said, the relationality and interconnectedness between country and community. And she particularly encourages us to pick a place or to find our place. Some people might refer to it as your spiritual home, whatever. And through observation and caring, really start to look after that place. And so the three of us thought, well, what is our place? And so behind me there, my place is not very far from here, is the Glasshouse Mountains. And I can see Mount Biawar over my left shoulder and Mount Tibrogargan over my right shoulder there. And for Peter, it's the Brisbane River. I'll just move my head out of the way. That squiggly orange. And for Dave, the Swan River, the blue. And yeah, so we created what we're calling a coda for the back of the book. And we had a lovely artist, Sarah Govis, draw up the coda for us of our places. And yeah, as the guys said, we've put the 40 gems of wisdom in this beautiful watercolour drawing. And we're hoping that that will be a useful tool for you, perhaps, that you could go away and blow up that, photocopy that page and perhaps blow it up to an A3 or something and put it, you know, somewhere in your study or your office or somewhere. And just, you know, that would be our visual prompt of the 40 gems of wisdom for you. So yeah, I'm very grateful to Mary. She spent time with me reading my chapter and giving me feedback, which was wonderful. And yeah, I've sort of feel like I've recommitted myself to looking after place and employing her place method. The second author I thought I'd just quickly mention, not because it was an easy chapter to write, it's on community economics. So I decided to be brave and throw myself into the writing of E.F. Schumacher. And his gem, and the name of his famous book, is Small is Beautiful. And so I thought to talk about that at this particular time right now because of the current pandemic. And perhaps if you're watching this, you have been in lockdown like we have been these past few months. And just now here in Australia, we're starting to emerge from that. So the place that I'm from has now relaxed travel and so on, and businesses starting to come back and people are starting to go back to work and so on. But what that is also feeling like is that we're going straight back to our business as usual, economics, growth-driven, capitalist, hyper-capitalist kind of approach. And that what we know has led to, you know, climate change and so on. So I guess for me, I'm feeling like E.F. Schumacher's words and philosophy are really crucial for us to remind us again about human scale technology, locally owned, workers' cooperatives, social enterprises, business economics around these kind of human scale activities, practical local level type economies, because yeah, that's what he theorised and practically worked on long before climate change was even a thing. So yeah, so that's what I write a little bit about in one of the chapters. And yeah, I've really enjoyed getting to know these authors in a deeper way. And it's been wonderful also to work with Peter and Dave and collaborate on this project. As I say, yeah, it's the book that I wished I'd had right at the beginning. So we're really happy to share this with you and put it out there in the world. And yeah, so I think that was all we wanted to say, guys. And we just wanted to say thank you for listening to us. And we hope you enjoy the book when you get a copy. And yeah, and we'll just say goodbye from Australia. Bye-bye.